Walking through the local hardware store a couple of years ago, and in the springtime, and they were trying to clear out their winter merchandise and move to spring, so they were practically giving this away. I picked it up and threw it in the basement, and I'm going to try it out today, see how well it actually works. That way I don't get stuck in an emergency situation and find out that it doesn't even function, that somebody replaced the heater and put bricks in there or something. So I'm going to open it up and see how it works. 10,000 BTUs per hour. They say it heats up to 500 square feet, but just ignore that. What matters is that it's 10,000 BTUs per hour. 10,000 BTUs is about 3 kilowatts of electric, equivalent to about 3 kilowatts of electric heat. A typical heater like this, just a standard plug-in into a 120 volt outlet, is going to put out about 5,000 BTUs and take about 1,500 watts. So this heater is equivalent to about 2 of these. That may not seem like a lot, but I know in my particular house, it's 1,000 square feet approximately upstairs and 1,000 square foot downstairs. Even on a cold winter day I'll define as about 0 degrees Fahrenheit, that it takes about 2,000, 2,500 watts of continuous heat to keep my house 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So this will keep it nice and comfortable if I choose to run it continuously. There's other safety issues with running a non-vented fuel-fired appliance inside for long periods of time, but more on that later. I do have a carbon monoxide detector, but this won't tell you whether it's safe in your house. I'll cover that a little bit more later. As far as features go on this, I'm just reading the box here. It says 10,000 BTUs per hour, and it operates 12 hours in 1 tank of kerosene. Kerosene has about 130,000 BTUs per gallon in it. That's its upper heating value. You actually get less heat out of it because it converts kerosene into water vapor, and that takes energy as well. So you don't actually get the heat, but you do get moist heat, which is nice. It has electric ignition, probably with a resistive element that takes batteries. Not too useful in my opinion. I can just use one of those lighters to light it, or a match. I'll always have one of those. The batteries may not always work. Has a safety switch, so that if you knock it over it shuts off. There's laws on that. Has a knob that I can turn the wick up and down, a button to push to extinguish it, a visible fuel gauge. To be honest, I bought this particular one because it was very inexpensive. I did not buy it because it was quality. We'll find out if that was a mistake or not. Turn the box around. And they say the fuel capacity is 1 gallon, which makes sense. That means that I can run about 12 hours at 10,000 BTUs. So that's the specs that I see on the box. We'll learn more once it gets opened. My house is fully electric. I don't have any natural gas or propane or any other source of heat. So kerosene is a very practical way to get emergency heat into my house. In this climate here in the Midwest, northern Midwest of the United States, it gets cold during the winter, and if the power should go out for some reason, within 1 day you're going to be freezing your butt off, and within 2 days everything will be frozen solid and you won't be able to get out of bed. So it is very prudent to have some sort of backup heat. A lot of people rely on gasoline generators for that. I don't really like that system for a few reasons. Gas generators are unreliable, take up a lot of room to store, you have to maintain them, and they're only maybe 20% efficient, meaning that I can buy 1 gallon of kerosene, and kerosene will stay good indefinitely when stored properly, and get about 120,000 BTUs of heat out of that gallon of kerosene. I would have to store 5 gallons of gasoline, which I have to cycle through every 6 months to keep it in good shape, to get the same amount of heat. And I can easily store 5 gallons of kerosene and get enough heat for about a week that way. I cannot so easily store 25 gallons of gasoline. So in my mind, this is a lot more practical. I can buy it, throw it in the basement, forget about it for 10 years, and it'll work just fine when I pull it out again. That's why I have this instead. But enough of me blabbing away here. Let's open the box and see what's inside. Inside the box, I find a safety manual. I'm sure you're supposed to read through this whole thing before you use it. I'm just going to chuck it on the table and forget about it. This is kind of interesting. Consumer notice: due to IRS regulations, 1K kerosene is dyed red in many areas. That's news to me. 1K kerosene here is generally clear. You do have to pay road tax to get it clear. If you don't pay road tax, it comes dyed red. But just pay the road tax and get the clear stuff. It burns better in a wick heater. I'm not sure who would be cheap enough to buy red fuel for their heater, but I guess there's some people. Comes with a transfer pump. I'll probably just use a funnel instead, but it's kind of nice that they send this along. It's a nice feature. There's a couple of D batteries in here. I assume to run the heating element. One here is already dented. They are heavy-duty batteries, not alkaline. I'm actually not going to put these in the heater, I think, because I'm going to throw this in my basement and store it. These batteries will probably just leak in time and make a mess out of my heater. I'd rather just light it with a match. Matches work. They always work, I know that. Set that aside. And looks like all that's left is the heater. So I'm going to pull this out of the box and we'll take a look at it. This is what it looks like right out of the box. Considering what I paid for it, I guess I'm pretty satisfied with the construction of it. The metal's decently tough. It doesn't feel like it's going to fall apart. The knob is substantial on it. The heating element is, I can't see it because there's packing material around it yet. You're going to have to take that off. It has this little bar in front. I'm assuming this is so that you don't set the heater too close to something, but in my mind this is way too close anyway, so it doesn't seem to serve much purpose. What I'm going to do is just take it off because it's in my way. And set this little metal dealie aside. Doesn't do anything for me. It has the tank, 1 gallon tank up here. Some packing material on the bottom. It's kind of neat how they do the fuel gauge in this thing. You can see that only once the tank is about empty will this register as being low on fuel. However, it's dual purpose because when you're filling it, you have the tank this way. And now, when you fill the tank from the bottom here, it'll tell you when the tank is full, so that you don't overfill it. You need some room for expansion in here. You don't want to fill it all the way to the top. That would be quite dangerous. Has a couple of carrying handles, which are very comfortable to carry it by. The back is well ventilated, so the back shouldn't get too hot. This battery cover is plastic, and it doesn't really latch. Not a big deal, just kind of, I don't know, it doesn't really latch. But overall I'm pretty happy with it. So I'm going to take this packing material away from the burner and take a closer look at that. Well, here's the heater fully unpacked with all the packing material removed. The finish inside of here is pretty good quality, really. It's a nice mirror finish. It should keep it cool. There is a scuff on it, but that's a packaging concern, not really anything to do with the quality of it. This front door opens easily. Just lift it up and hinge it open. There's some dust in here I'm going to blow out, but otherwise it looks pretty well constructed. The actual burner in here, the catalytic converter part, I don't like that name because it's not a catalytic converter. There's no catalyst inside. The idea, though, is that there's this circular wick down in here that I'll show you, and it sends a flame up into here. And this whole assembly here is just a big collection of screens that get very hot from the flame. You mix that with abundant air and all of the extra fuel vapors that didn't burn the first time, all the carbon monoxide, then has a hot surface to combust with, to combust against as it passes over that hot surface. And then you should just get clean exhaust out of it, carbon dioxide and water, along with all of the other elements in the air around us, nitrogen and such. That's the idea anyway. A properly functioning kerosene heater shouldn't emit any carbon monoxide, really nothing at all. I have a 1920s kerosene heater that I used just as a novelty a while back, and even that one has no carbon monoxide output. And really, if it's functioning properly, you won't have any carbon monoxide from a kerosene heater. That's kind of a misnomer. But it is a very good idea to have a carbon monoxide detector, because if something does go wrong and it starts burning poorly, you may not know without this, and that can be extremely deadly. I'll cover a little bit later what you really need to be worried about with these. They do use up oxygen, convert that to carbon dioxide, and that can be dangerous, but that's for later on in this video. So I'm going to remove this burner here and show you the wick down inside. I'll grab the camera here too so you can see it better. Down inside of it is the round wick that runs the heater. And take my knob here, crank it up. Oh, it is up all the way. And the wick is up. Put the wick down. So the wick in all new heaters is fiberglass. The old ones used a cotton wick. Those you have to maintain differently than these. With all modern heaters, after every 100 hours or so of use, you need to dry burn the wick, let it run out of fuel, put the wick up all the way, let it run out of fuel. Do this outdoors definitely. It creates a lot of smoke, and burn the wick dry. That'll clean it off so that you get a nice clean wick again. And the better quality fuel you use, the less often you'll have to do that. But I'm not going to use this heater enough to probably ever have to do that, so I'm not going to worry about it. But that's the wick, and it just goes up inside this thing. I thought it was kind of interesting that you turn the wick up all the way and hit the igniter to light it. And they have this little igniter inside with a resistive element that contacts the wick right there. And they obviously tested this in the factory because there's a little burn mark on the wick right where that igniter touches the wick, which is actually a good sign. I didn't expect them to even test something like this, a cheap consumer heater. But they did. Has an extinguishing button on here. You just push this and the wick pops down. It also will pop down if you lift it up and tilt it, so that if you knock it over it goes out. I carried this around a few times and tested it out. It's not so sensitive that I can't carry it from room to room if I'm careful, so that's very nice, because I want to be able to move it while it's operating without relighting it every time. It'll stink every time you put it out and relight it, so that's a nice feature. But before I use it for the first time, I'm going to have to obviously put kerosene in it. So I'm going to take the tank out here and go fill it up. I'm going to fill this tank just with the funnel instead of with the transfer pump like I said I was going to do. And, just unscrew this and put the funnel in here. Take out this packaging that I didn't get before. Now in terms of what to put in these, I have some clear 1K spec kerosene. 1K is 500 ppm. You can get this from filling station pumps also. It's kind of hard to find. I did find some around here that I put in a 5-gallon kerosene jug, but I'm going to use this up first. The other stuff I bought is 15 ppm kerosene, sulfur, 15 parts per million instead of 500 like this. So I'm going to burn the dirtier stuff first. I don't know if you can see it on camera, but it is water clear. I would recommend always using water clear kerosene if you're going to burn it inside your house. If you're going to do it in your garage, I guess it's up to you what you want to use. And now, I don't know if you can see it on camera, but the gauge has kerosene in it. So I'll stop there and put this into the heater. You can see that it spilled kerosene all over the place. In retrospect, I probably should have used the transfer pump that they gave me. But looks like this container is sealed pretty well. It's not leaking. So I think I can safely put it into the heater. Kerosene is not particularly flammable, so I'm not too worried about any fire danger here at all. But I'm going to put this in here in the garage for a few reasons. One, I don't know if it leaks. I don't want it to leak in my house. Since there's an internal tank as well, not just the one that I filled. You can hear it gurgling away as it fills up that lower reservoir. And if it leaks on my garage floor, I'm not particularly worried about it, but if it leaks inside, that could be bad. So it stopped gurgling. We'll let it sit here for a while and see if it leaks or not. I do want to make sure that the wick is fully saturated with kerosene before I try to light it. So I'm going to let it sit here for an hour or so, just to make sure that the wick is fully saturated before I hit the go button. And then the first time that I light it, I'm going to do that inside my garage, because there's probably manufacturing oil, machine oils on the metal parts and such. And I'm going to burn those off out here before I bring it inside. And also just to check the general function, so that nothing goes terribly wrong inside and set off my smoke alarm or anything like that. But I'll put this away for the moment and come back when I'm ready to light it. Okay, the fuel's been in there for about an hour. I think the wick will be saturated enough to burn properly. This is the first time the heater's ever been lit, so it'll probably stink a little bit, but that's why I'm in my garage. So I ended up putting the batteries in here. I said I wouldn't, but I'm going to anyway. It's just more convenient. I'll take them out for storage. I could just reach in here and lift up the burner. Open the door, of course. Lift up the burner and light it with a match, but instead I'm just going to use the igniter like you're supposed to. So crank the wick up all the way, and let's see if it works. And it's not lighting. Try again. Well, maybe an hour isn't long enough. I actually did look through the instruction manual, and they said an hour. I'm going to take this apart and look at it a little bit more closely. Sorry for the odd camera angle here. I only have two hands, and sometimes that's a bit of a problem, so I'm going to set you down in this box for the time being. I'm not sure why that igniter didn't work. The wick is clearly saturated with kerosene. I took this burner unit off, and it seemed to be fully saturated, so I'm going to try to light it with an actual flame instead of their electric igniter, see if that works better. Yeah, that went immediately. So I don't know if the battery ignition is going to be very reliable or not, but it's definitely burning now. I have the wick up all the way, and I'm just going to let this get going and adjust the flame until it's burning nice. Let the whole heater get nice and hot, and hopefully burn off all the oils that are on it. Put it out, let it cool down, haul it inside, and then we'll see how it works inside. I'm still in my garage. The heater's been running for 5 or 10 minutes now, and I just thought I'd show you what it looks like in a darker room. It does throw off pretty good heat, but it also smells really, really bad. Had quite a bit of visible smoke coming out of it at first, as those manufacturing oils burnt off. I think it's getting a little bit cleaner now, but you definitely wouldn't want to do this in your house the first time. It's kind of interesting how this adjustment knob works. You turn it all the way up to light it, and there's just a very narrow range between here and here. That's all the more you can actually adjust it. And right now I have it all the way down, and you can still see some visible flame coming out of the top. If I turn it all the way up, then it's way too high. There's all kinds of fire in there. And it seems like I have to turn it all the way down to make the flame right, so it really isn't very well adjusted from the factory. It's too high. I wish I could turn it down a little bit more yet, but kerosene heaters are not adjustable. You don't want to turn the wick down and make them cooler. There's only one setting that they burn properly at, and that's the point of having this knob. I think they just locked it this way so that you can't turn it way down like some people would, and that's kind of a dangerous situation, to turn it down right before you go to bed or something, because you could end up with carbon monoxide poisoning then. But I wish it was a little bit more adjustable than this. I think if I leave it all the way down, it'll be acceptable. But I'll let this burn for a while more and bring it inside and light it in there and see how that works inside. Well, here's the real test. I'm inside my house. I'm just going to plop the heater down in front of my TV and watch TV for a while. That way I can keep track of both of them and make sure that everything's working properly. I have my battery operated carbon monoxide detector. This is a really cheap consumer one, and to be honest, it probably doesn't work very well. It doesn't register anything below 30 ppm, and 30 is already on the border of dangerous. And it's also plus or minus 30% accuracy, but it's better than nothing, so I'm going to keep that on hand. It should warn me before I notice any symptoms anyway, if there's a problem. And my smoke alarms, I know, are extremely sensitive to smoke. If you can see any smoke whatsoever, they'll already be beeping, so we'll see if this sets it off or not. I hope it doesn't, but it sure smoked a lot in the garage. So I'm going to give the igniter another try. Maybe the wick had to be carbonized a little bit before the igniter would work. I don't know. I'm going to give it a try and see if it works. Crank the wick all the way up and give it a try. It glows bright red and crackles a little bit, but it's not actually lighting the wick. So I'm just going to use my match and light it that way. So it is going. In terms of reviewing the ignition system they give you, I would give it 2 thumbs down. It doesn't work. But like I said, I don't really care, so it's not a big deal to me. I'm going to show you the entire light up sequence this time. You can skip past this portion of the video if you'd like, because it'll probably be boring. But in the meantime, while it's lighting up and getting hot, I am going to mention a little bit about safety with kerosene heaters. That's obviously a pretty important thing. I'd mentioned that carbon monoxide shouldn't be a problem as long as it's burning properly. But there are other safety concerns. This is a fairly well-sealed house that I'm in. A typical residential building will have one air change per 2 hours or so. The extremely tight ones might take one air change every 10 hours. Air change meaning that the house leaks air. During the winter it'll leak hot air through the apertures in the ceiling, your recessed lighting and such, drawing cold air through the cracks in the basement. And you get air circulation that way, so the combustion byproducts of a heater like this actually do get circulated out of your house. That's why it's safe to use something like this indoors. However, you do have to be careful. This is a 10,000 BTU unit, so that means it takes 10 or 12 hours to burn 1 gallon of kerosene. And the byproducts, turn this down a little bit now. The byproducts of a gallon of kerosene are, and you can calculate this all out if you're interested, but a certain amount of carbon dioxide, and it uses up a certain amount of oxygen. Air outside has a oxygen content of about 21%, and once you get down to around 19%, you can no longer function properly. Humans can no longer function properly. You can get acclimated to less oxygen, but that takes a matter of days to get acclimated to it. You won't get acclimated overnight. And it also puts out carbon dioxide, obviously. Converts your fuel into water vapor and carbon dioxide. That's what fires are supposed to do if they burn cleanly. And carbon dioxide levels, once you get above about 2%, they interfere with your breathing. So you need to be careful with that. And depending on how well sealed your house is, you could run into problems with it. And that, if that's the case, then you'll need to keep a door or a window open a crack, but that kind of defeats the purpose of having a heat source because you'll let in as much cold air as you make heat. But that's something to keep in mind. I know that in my particular house here, just by running some calculations, as long as there's no carbon monoxide, and I'll be monitoring that I can safely burn 1 gallon of kerosene, and that'll make the carbon dioxide level about 2% with 1 gallon of kerosene. If I want to burn any more than that, then I'll have to worry about how many air changes per hour my house has. But I'm not going to worry about that just now. For now, I just want to see if this heater works properly. So it looks like it's pretty well warmed up. right now, and unfortunately it does smell some. I'm not too happy about that. But I'm just going to let it go a little bit here, and I'll get back to you with what I think about it. Well, so far things are going pretty poorly. The igniter didn't work properly, so I looked through the manual to see if I was doing anything wrong. I was doing exactly what they said to do. And also the heater was burning so poorly that I also had to look through the manual to see if I was doing anything wrong, and I wasn't. It was just improperly adjusted from the factory, which is a little bit disappointing. But what I found out is that if you don't turn the knob all the way up before you light it, it lets you adjust it at a different range. And so I turned it up only part way, lit it, and now I'm adjusting it to the proper level. You want it to be the entire heating screen there, the catalytic converter, to be bright red, and you want a little bit of blue flame on the top, but no yellow flame. And that's what I'm trying to adjust here. And once I get it properly adjusted, I want to make sure that I can burn down through the whole tank without having to touch that knob again. Because if you're constantly having to tweak the heater, that's no good. You could easily get into again a situation where it's not burning properly. But so I don't know about this heater right now. It seems to be a little bit difficult to use, and like I said, it stinks so bad I have to open a window already. But maybe once it's burning properly, it'll calm down and be acceptable. I'll check back with you a little bit later again. I had the heater running for about 6 hours. During that time it warmed the house up from 68 degrees Fahrenheit to about 75. It's not particularly cold outside today, it's about 30 degrees Fahrenheit, but that's perfectly adequate for a emergency type heat application, which is what I purchased this unit for. So I'm happy with the amount of heat output from it. The smell that was quite objectionable to start with didn't get any worse. I think a lot of that was just from lighting it the first time, and then from the manufacturing oils burning off again. My garage still stinks, the house doesn't smell too bad. So I think I probably just needed to burn it off a little bit longer outside before I brought it in. So I'm not going to knock the heater too much for that. It did burn quite cleanly. There's no soot inside whatsoever. It's still perfectly clean, so it's pretty well designed that way. I did have one problem with it, however. When I hit the extinguish button, turned the wick down all the way, the flame didn't go out. It still continued burning at a very low level for about 10 minutes before it finally went out. I think the wick is just adjusted a little bit too high from the factory. It did extinguish on its own eventually. I just set it in the garage and let it burn out. But again, it is functional. I think once the wick burns a little bit, it'll fix that problem on its own. In terms of the packaging, I think the packaging was done pretty well. Nothing was really damaged except the batteries. It came with a siphon pump. That's a nice feature to have. I didn't think it really was until I spilled kerosene in my garage, so in retrospect I now think it's a pretty good idea. The build quality of the heater itself is quite good. I didn't actually open it up and check the guts down inside of it to know how well those are made, but from looking at just the outside of it, it looks like it's made pretty well. The metal is sufficiently heavy gauge to give it a solid feel. The fit and finish is nice. It's a quality paint on it. The engineering that went into it is, I think, pretty good, really, for a consumer heater. You can see that they did a lot of little things that they didn't really have to do. For example, this little extra piece of metal on top to keep the top from getting too hot, that was put in there. They didn't have to do that. The burner itself looks fairly expensive to construct. They probably didn't have to put all that work into it. There's numerous other little things too, so I'm pretty happy with the build quality. The lighting mechanism, I can't say the same about. It doesn't really work in my experience. You may have better luck, I don't know, but that's pretty minor, so I'm not going to get too excited about that. In terms of the performance of it, how comfortable it is to use, the heat output, that depends on what you're using it for, but I think 10,000 BTUs is appropriate. Remember that in a kerosene heater you can't turn it up and down. There's only one heat setting where it will burn properly, so the amount of heat output is proportional to the diameter of the wick. This is 10,000 BTUs, and I think that's about right for a house. If you want to use it for comfort heat instead of for emergency heat, you might want something larger, but this is good for this use. In terms of the odor, I think it's pretty typical of a kerosene heater. There's always going to be some. This one burned pretty clean, so I think that's acceptable. And it also burned consistently. I didn't have to keep adjusting the knob. Once I got it adjusted properly and figured out that if you don't turn it all the way up before you light it, then you can adjust it within a lower range. Instead of cranking it all the way up, then you can only adjust it between high and really high. So once I figured that out, it really was pretty easy to use. You could adjust the flame within the first 5 minutes or so and then forget about it. So I'm happy with that. As far as safety goes, it is a kerosene heater, so there's some dangers, obviously. But the carbon monoxide level stayed at 0 all the time, so that wasn't a problem. There's no hot spots on it. I took my infrared thermometer and took a look through the local hardware store a couple of years ago, and in the springtime, and they were trying to clear out their winter merchandise and move to spring, so they were practically giving this away. I picked it up and threw it in the basement, and I'm going to try it out today, see how well it actually works. That way I don't get stuck in an emergency situation and find out that it doesn't even function, that somebody replaced the heater and put bricks in there or something. So I'm going to open it up and see how it works. 10,000 BTUs per hour. They say it heats up to 500 square feet, but just ignore that. What matters is that it's 10,000 BTUs per hour. 10,000 BTUs is about 3 kilowatts of electric, equivalent to about 3 kilowatts of electric heat. A typical heater like this, just a standard plug-in into a 120 volt outlet, is going to put out about 5,000 BTUs and take about 1,500 watts. So this heater is equivalent to about 2 of these. That may not seem like a lot, but I know in my particular house, it's 1,000 square feet approximately upstairs and 1,000 square foot downstairs. Even on a cold winter day I'll define as about 0 degrees Fahrenheit, that it takes about 2,000, 2,500 watts of continuous heat to keep my house 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So this will keep it nice and comfortable if I choose to run it continuously. There's other safety issues with running a non-vented fuel-fired appliance inside for long periods of time, but more on that later. I do have a carbon monoxide detector, but this won't tell you whether it's safe in your house. I'll cover that a little bit more later. As far as features go on this, I'm just reading the box here. It says 10,000 BTUs per hour, and it operates 12 hours in 1 tank of kerosene. Kerosene has about 130,000 BTUs per gallon in it. That's its upper heating value. You actually get less heat out of it because it converts kerosene into water vapor, and that takes energy as well. So you don't actually get the heat, but you do get moist heat, which is nice. It has electric ignition, probably with a resistive element that takes batteries. Not too useful in my opinion. I can just use one of those lighters to light it, or a match. I'll always have one of those. The batteries may not always work. It has a safety switch, so that if you knock it over it shuts off. There's laws on that. It has a knob that I can turn the wick up and down, a button to push to extinguish it, a visible fuel gauge. To be honest, I bought this particular one because it was very inexpensive. I did not buy it because it was quality. We'll find out if that was a mistake or not. Turn the box around. And they say the fuel capacity is 1 gallon, which makes sense. That means that it can run about 12 hours at 10,000 BTUs. So that's the specs that I